Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into an absolute saga. It starts out like a classic Silicon Valley story, highly methodical, deeply technical software engineering, but then it abruptly twists into a high-stakes thriller of dramatic corporate espionage.
So, what actually happens when the world's most secretive tech giant goes to war over AI? To really understand the massive lawsuit that's currently shaking up Silicon Valley, we've got to look back at the foundation Apple was quietly building behind closed doors. We're going to see exactly how a slow, methodical engineering strategy completely collided with a frantic race for talent, leading to wild allegations of stolen hardware secrets and, honestly, an unimaginable partnership.
All right, let's get right into Act 1, Apple's 2025 AI Foundation. Apple released this really comprehensive tech report breaking down their generative models, and they focused heavily on a super compact 3 billion parameter on-device model. Basically, this thing was highly optimized to run efficiently right on Apple Silicon. We're talking low-latency inference with barely any resource usage. They even used clever techniques like key-value cache sharing to slash memory usage by nearly 40%. It was a literal masterclass in figuring out how to squeeze incredibly powerful AI directly into the hardware you hold in your hand every single day.
Now, for the heavy lifting, the more complex tasks, Apple built a much larger server-side model using a design called Parallel Track Mixture of Experts, or PTMOE for short. It's kind of like a giant puzzle. Instead of one long sequential stack, the model is chopped up into multiple smaller transformers, or what they call tracks. By processing data independently across these tracks, they managed to massively reduce synchronization overhead. In some setups, it literally cut that delay by almost 90%. This allowed them to scale up incredibly efficiently while keeping response times super fast.
But here's where it gets very Apple. To maintain their famously strict privacy standards, they created something called private cloud compute. When your phone needs to send data off-device to those bigger server models, they didn't just rent standard cloud tech. No way. They built completely custom infrastructure using Swift on server and completely stripped out traditional data center tools. I mean, no remote shells, no general-purpose logging, nothing. Everything had to be deterministic and perfectly secure, ensuring that even someone with privileged access couldn't snoop on user data. They even went as far as requiring software images to be published to a public transparency log so independent researchers could inspect them. And to actually achieve this massive in-house training scale, Apple used a distributed asynchronous reinforcement learning infrastructure. Think of it like a highly coordinated factory. They separated the trajectory generators, the parts running the AI generations and calculating rewards, from the policy updater, which actually applies the upgrades to the model. Because these run independently, generation and improvement could happen at the exact same time. It was wildly efficient, using roughly 40% fewer devices and 75% less compute time than their older systems. At this point, everything pointed to Apple meticulously building its own complete end-to-end AI universe. But then, things took a turn. This highly methodical, predictable strategy rapidly shifted into a full-blown explosive tech thriller. Following that foundational tech report in 2025, an absolute earthquake hit the industry in January 2026, which was followed just months later by a massive lawsuit against OpenAI. Which brings us to Act 2. In January 2026, a joint statement completely shocked the tech world. Apple's next generation of foundation models would actually be based on Google's Gemini models and cloud technology. Yeah, you heard that right. After all that intense in-house work on their own server models we just talked about, Apple ultimately decided that Google provided the most capable foundation for Apple intelligence. It was a staggering pivot. Apple essentially outsourced its heavy-lifting generative AI to its absolute biggest smartphone rival. And that sets the stage for Act 3, suing over secrets. The corporate warfare begins. So while Apple was busy pivoting to partner with Google for AI software, they were simultaneously fighting tooth and nail to protect their hardware dominance from OpenAI. In a July 2026 lawsuit, Apple claimed that OpenAI is actively trying to build an iPhone rival, and they're poaching aggressively to make it happen. We're talking more than 400 former Apple employees jumping ship to OpenAI. This even includes heavy involvement from former Apple design chief Jony Ive and his new company I/O. But guys, it's not just about poaching talent. Apple alleges a former employee, Chang actually used an authentication bug to breach internal networks and download dozens of highly confidential hardware files right before leaving. It gets wilder too. The lawsuit claims OpenAI directed candidates who were still working at Apple to bring actual physical iPhone parts to their interviews for show and tell sessions. They allegedly even used a document tied to former design chief Chang to coach new hires on exactly how to dodge Apple's exit interview security. Now, for their part, OpenAI responded stating they have no interest in other companies' trade secrets and that they remain completely focused on their own technology.
You have to admit, the irony of this strategic reversal is just fascinating. You've got Apple, the undisputed king of consumer hardware, stepping back slightly on the most advanced AI software to partner up with Google Gemini. Meanwhile, OpenAI, the absolute pioneer of generative AI software, is allegedly siphoning Apple's top hardware designers and trade secrets to build their own physical device, reportedly aiming for a 2027 release. It is a complete 180-degree strategic reversal for both of them. And right now, this lawsuit is already acting as a massive drag on OpenAI, supposedly slowing down their recruitment and making suppliers really nervous about working with them just out of fear of angering Apple. So, with Apple leveraging its massive legal and supply chain power to halt OpenAI's hardware ambitions, and OpenAI pushing forward with unprecedented momentum, the stakes literally could not be higher. When the dust finally settles from the lawsuits, the secret projects, and all these shifting alliances, who will ultimately control the future of AI hardware? Thanks so much for joining this explainer. Keep your eyes peeled, because this story, it's really just getting started.